Caleb Hart arrived in the small western town on a bright afternoon when the sun was soft and the wind carried the smell of dry grass. He came driving a tired old truck with a trailer full of basic tools, a few boxes, and the last hopes he had for a better life. People in the town had seen newcomers before, but most of them did not stay long. Caleb, however, stepped out of his truck with calm eyes and a steady way of moving that made him look like someone who could handle hard work. He was not loud, not showy, just a man who had learned to keep going even when life tried to slow him down. He had come to take over a small ranch on the edge of town, left behind by a distant relative he barely knew. It was not a fancy place, but it was enough to start fresh. Most importantly, it gave him space wide. Open land where he could raise cattle and build a simple but honest life. The folks in town welcomed him politely. They were friendly in their own quiet way, asking him where he came from, what he planned to do, and if he needed help settling in. But there was one thing nearly everyone mentioned, sometimes with a laugh, sometimes with a shake of the head. They kept bringing up a stretch of land north of his ranch, a huge, wild area known as the Giant Virgin. At first, Caleb thought they were joking. The name sounded strange, almost silly, like something made up to tease newcomers. But the more he heard about it, the more he understood that the land had a serious reputation. It was called that because no one had ever truly touched it. No one had built anything on it. No one had managed to shape it, even a little. It was untouched, pure, raw, wild land that had resisted every attempt to settle, plant, or even cross. Some said it was too tangled with brush. Others said the ground shifted too easily. And a few insisted the weather around it changed without warning. Whatever the real reason was, one thing was clear. The land did not cooperate with anyone. Nearly every longtime rancher in town had tried dealing with it at some point. Some wanted to graze their cattle there, others wanted to clear it for farming, and a few dreamed of building cabins or roads through it. But every attempt ended the same way, with frustration, wasted money, and tired hands. Over time, the land became part of local tradition. Whenever someone new arrived, people would jokingly challenge them. "Try it if you can. The land will teach you a lesson." Caleb took the comments with a friendly smile, thinking people were just trying to warn him against being too ambitious. But curiosity grew in him. He started asking questions. What exactly made the land so difficult? What had happened to the others who tried? The answers came in bits and pieces, delivered with small laughs, raised brows, or long sighs. One old rancher, a man named Harris, explained it best. He told Caleb that the land was like a giant maze of sharp turns, hidden dips, and hills that rose without warning. The soil was soft in some places and too thick in others, making it unpredictable for building or planting. Wild grass grew taller than a man, covering rocks, holes, and uneven ground that made walking risky. Even horses refused to go deep into it. Cattle wandered off and got lost. Every machine taken onto the land broke down or got stuck. People swore it wasn't haunted or cursed, it was just too wild, too large, too stubborn. At first, Caleb tried to ignore the talk. He had enough on his hands fixing his own ranch, patching fences, cleaning the barn, and settling into a daily routine. But the land kept tugging at his thoughts. Every evening, he could see the outline of it from his porch. A dark stretch rising in the distance, bigger than anything he had ever owned. It looked calm from far away, almost beautiful, like a sleeping giant. But the closer he got to it, the more he felt its size and presence. It was both inviting and intimidating. One morning, after nearly a week in town, he decided to take a closer look. He saddled his horse, a patient brown mare named Daisy, and set out for the northern edge. The ride was peaceful at first. He passed gentle hills, dry patches of grass, and old fence lines. Birds flew overhead, and far-off cattle moved slowly through the fields. Everything felt normal, simple, easy. But as he neared the edge of the Giant Virgin, things began to change. The air felt different, heavier somehow, as if the land exhaled slowly. The grass grew taller and thicker. The soil became uneven, making Daisy take cautious steps. Bushes gathered in clumps, twisting into shapes that looked like they had never been touched by any tool. Caleb felt a strange mix of excitement and caution. He was not afraid, but he understood why people talked about the land the way they did. When he reached the boundary marked only by a broken wooden post leaning to one side, he dismounted and walked the rest of the way. The ground under his boots felt soft, almost spongy. He pushed aside tall grass to get a better look at what lay ahead. The land stretched far, farther than his eyes could follow. There were no clear paths, no signs of life except for faint traces left by wild animals. It was silent, not in an eerie way, but in a deep, natural way that made him feel very small. Caleb took a few careful steps forward. It felt like stepping into another world. The land had its own rhythm, untouched by fences or human plans. He could imagine how difficult it would be to bring cattle here, or to clear a space for anything useful. But he could also see potential water sources hidden somewhere deeper, rich soil waiting beneath the messy surface, and enough space to change the future of any rancher brave enough to try. He stood there for a long moment, letting the immensity sink in. He wasn't a man who made decisions quickly. He liked to think, to absorb, to understand. The land in front of him wasn't just big, it was overwhelming. It asked more questions than it answered. It offered opportunity and challenge at the same time, but something inside him stirred. A spark. A small flame of interest. He felt drawn to the land. Not with overconfidence, but with a quiet curiosity. He wondered if, maybe, just maybe, he could succeed where others had not. Not to prove anything to anyone, but simply because the land seemed to be calling for someone who would respect it, study it, and work with it instead of fighting against it. Still, even as hope flickered, Caleb felt honesty rising in him. He whispered softly to himself, "This is too big for me." The words carried no shame. They were not an admission of defeat, just a recognition of the truth. The land was huge, untamed, and far beyond anything he had ever handled. It could take years to understand it, much less try to shape it. But even as he stood there, knowing the size of the challenge, he did not turn away quickly. Instead, he stayed a little longer, letting the sight fill him with a sense of wonder. The giant virgin was not a simple enemy or obstacle. It was a mystery, a puzzle, a test of patience, rather than strength. Caleb knew he might not be ready now, or even soon, but the idea of exploring it piece by piece stayed with him like a quiet whisper. When he finally walked back to Daisy and began the ride home, his mind was full of thoughts, none of them fully formed. But one thing was certain. The land had left an impression on him. It had dared him to try, to see if he had the courage not to conquer it, but to understand it. The challenge had begun, not loudly or boldly, but gently, like the first breeze before a coming season. And even though Caleb still thought the land was too big for him, he also knew something else. He had not felt this alive in a long time. Caleb woke up early the next morning with the picture of the giant virgin still fresh in his mind. He had slept lightly, turning over again and again, his thoughts circling the same question. Why did he feel such a strange pull toward that wild land? It wasn't like he needed more work. His own ranch was small but demanding. The fences needed repair, the barn roof had leaks, and the cattle were not yet familiar with him. Any sensible man would focus on what he already had, but as the sun rose and the first light touched his fields, Caleb felt the same quiet curiosity he had felt the day before. He made himself a simple breakfast, drank a cup of warm coffee, and stepped outside. The air was cool and clear. A few birds sang from the nearby trees, and the distant mountains glowed faintly in the morning sun. Caleb stood still for a moment, breathing in the quiet. Life on a ranch wasn't easy, but it had its own kind of peace. Yet something about the wild land beyond his home made that peace feel incomplete, as if there was unfinished business waiting for him. He spent the first half of the day working on the ranch, fixing loose planks, checking the cattle's water supply, and mending a section of fence. He liked using his hands. It kept his mind calm. But even while he worked, his thoughts drifted back to the giant virgin. He remembered the tall grass brushing against his legs, the uneven ground beneath his boots, and the soft silence hanging over it all. The place had felt alive, untamed, mysterious. And now that he had seen it up close, he felt as if it was watching him back. By midday, the sun was warm, and Caleb wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. He leaned on the fence, looking out across his own land. It was good land, manageable, familiar, and safe. Nothing like the wild stretch up north. He could live here for years and never run out of work. But what bothered him was the way everyone talked about the giant virgin. They didn't just warn him. They seemed amused by the idea of anyone trying again. It had become almost a tradition for the town. Let newcomers think about it, dream about it, and finally give up just like everyone else had. Caleb didn't consider himself especially brave or stubborn. But he didn't like feeling limited either. He didn't like the idea that there was land out there that everyone had accepted as impossible. It stirred something inside him, not anger, but a soft determination. That afternoon, he decided to learn more before making any choices. He walked into town, tying his horse outside the small diner where locals often gathered. The bell above the door chimed as he stepped in, and a few heads turned. People knew who he was by now, the new rancher, the quiet one who listened carefully and didn't brag. He greeted the waitress, ordered a simple meal, and sat near the window. After a few minutes, Old Man Harris walked in. The man had white hair, a thin build, and a calm expression that suggested he had seen many years of wind, sun, and earth. When he spotted Caleb, he gave a nod and walked over. "Mind if I sit?" Harris asked. "Of course not," Caleb replied with a friendly smile. Harris eased into the chair. "Heard you visited the giant virgin yesterday." Caleb blinked. "News travels fast here," Harris chuckled. "In a small town, everything travels fast." Caleb hesitated before speaking. "I didn't go far. Just close enough to get a look. That's farther than most folks go these days," Harris said. "Most gave up a long time ago." "I can see why," Caleb admitted. "It's something else." "It is," Harris agreed, nodding slowly. "But I'm curious. What did you think of it?" Caleb paused, choosing his words carefully. "It feels big, bigger than I imagined, and difficult, but also full of potential." Harris smiled, as if he had expected that answer. "You remind me of myself when I was younger. I tried working that land once. Thought I could be the one to figure it out." He sighed softly. "It taught me humility." Caleb leaned forward. "What stopped you?" "Time," Harris replied. "And money. And patience. The land demands all three. And even then, it may not give anything back." Caleb thought about that. "But is it impossible?" Harris tapped his fingers on the table thoughtfully. "Impossible? No. I don't like that word. But it's challenging. You have to understand it before you work it. Not force it. Not fight it. It's the kind of land that teaches you as you go." Caleb listened carefully, appreciating the old man's calm honesty. Harris continued. "You're a smart man. If you decide to try something there, don't rush. Take your time. Walk it. Map it. Learn its mood. Every part of that land is different." Caleb nodded slowly. The advice made sense. When he returned to his ranch later that day, he felt clearer. He wasn't going to try to tame the land in one go. That would be foolish. Instead, he would study it. Piece by piece, step by step. Maybe he would never control it fully, but he could try to understand it. The next morning, he brought a notebook, a small shovel, a water bottle, and a simple map with him. Daisy trotted patiently as they rode north again. This time, Caleb didn't stop at the edge. He tied Daisy to a sturdy bush and walked in deeper, pushing aside grass, stepping carefully around dips in the ground, and marking small details in his notebook. He tested the soil with the shovel, feeling its texture between his fingers. Some parts were wet and rich. Others were dry and crumbly. He noted where the land sloped, where water might gather during rain, and where natural paths seemed to form. He found tracks, deer, rabbits, and other small animals, showing that wildlife had made roots long before humans ever tried. After 2 hours, he discovered a small stream hidden behind thick bushes. The water was clear and cool. He tasted a drop on his tongue. Clean. Useful. He knelt beside it, watching the sunlight sparkle on its surface. This was important. Water meant possibilities. Life. Growth. If he ever wanted to use even a piece of this land, this stream could be a starting point. As he explored further, he heard the faint rustle of something in the tall grass. A small brown rabbit darted out, paused to look at him for a moment, then hopped away. Caleb smiled. It was comforting to see the land wasn't empty. It was full of life, just hidden, quiet, waiting. He walked until the sun began to lower, then headed back to Daisy, his notebook filled with notes and small sketches. His boots were dusty, his legs tired, but his spirit felt light. He had not conquered anything today. He hadn't even made a dent, but he had begun to understand the land, its shape, its sounds, its secrets. That felt like progress. When he returned home, he studied his notes at the kitchen table. The map looked messy but hopeful. He could see clusters of possibilities, areas where the ground was stable, where water flowed, where the land opened gently instead of rising sharply. But he also saw how big the challenge was. The land stretched far beyond what he had walked, and even the small area he studied was full of obstacles. Thick bushes, uneven ground, hidden dips. It would take years to clear even half of it, maybe more. As he stared at the map, he whispered again, almost repeating the words from before, "This is too big for me." But this time, the words felt different. They weren't a warning. They were the truth, but a truth he was willing to face. Something could be too big and still worth trying. Something could be difficult and still meaningful. He folded the map, closed his notebook, and leaned back in his chair. The land had challenged him. Not loudly, not with force, but gently, as if asking, "How much patience do you have? How much heart?" And Caleb knew he had enough to take the next step tomorrow. Caleb woke before sunrise the next morning, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervous energy. The quiet of dawn always brought him a gentle kind of focus, but today felt different. Today was the day he planned to do more than simply observe the giant virgin. He wanted to take the first small step toward working with the land, or at least trying to. The idea wasn't to conquer anything, or to prove the town wrong. It was simply something inside him, a quiet push that said he needed to try. He made a light breakfast and packed a small bag with simple tools: a handsaw, gloves, a stronger shovel, a coil of rope, and his notebook. He added a sandwich and a water bottle, knowing he would spend many hours out there. When he stepped outside, the air was cool and still. The sky had begun turning soft orange, with long shadows stretching across the ground. Daisy, his trusty mare, raised her head and snorted softly, as if she understood they were in for a long day. As he rode toward the giant virgin, the world slowly brightened. Birds chirped from nearby trees, and small animals scurried across the path. Caleb felt a growing sense of purpose. He didn't need to rush. The land wasn't going anywhere, but he also didn't want to let fear, doubt, or the town's warnings settle too deeply in his mind. He needed to see for himself what was possible. When he reached the northern boundary, he dismounted and tied Daisy securely. The same broken wooden post stood there, leaning like a tired old guard. Caleb took a deep breath and stepped into the tall grass. He walked carefully, remembering the uneven ground and hidden dips. Even small steps required attention. The sun rose slowly behind him, throwing warm light over the wild landscape. He headed toward the small stream he had discovered the day before, using his notebook sketches to guide him. The brush was thick in places, and he had to push aside branches and long grass that reached his waist, but he was patient. Every swing of his saw, every pull of the rope, every careful footstep made him feel more connected to the land. When he finally reached the stream, he was pleased to see it flowing gently. The sunlight reflected off the water, making it shimmer. It was peaceful, alive, and bright. Caleb knelt beside it and washed his hands, letting the coolness refresh him. This area, he decided, would be his starting point. It was small, quiet, and seemed more manageable than other parts of the land. If he could clear a little space here, just enough to stand comfortably and take in the surroundings, it would be a good beginning. He chose a patch of land beside the stream where the ground seemed more stable. The grass was thick, almost as tall as his shoulder in some places, and tangled together like a natural wall. It wasn't dangerous, just overwhelming. Caleb put on his gloves and began working. First he cut the tall grass in small sections, laying the cut pieces neatly to the side. It was slow work, but the rhythm was calming. Every few minutes he paused to wipe sweat from his forehead and drink water. The sun climbed higher, but the shade from a few nearby trees helped keep the area cooler. As he worked, he discovered hidden stones beneath the grass. Some were small and smooth, while others were large and shaped in odd ways, almost as if placed by nature on purpose. He used the shovel to move the smaller stones aside and marked the larger ones on his map. He did not try to force anything. He moved slowly, studying the land with every step. By midday, he had cleared enough space to see the ground more clearly. He could stand upright without tall grass brushing against his shoulders. It was still rough, uneven, and wild, but the progress felt real. He sat on one of the larger stones, pulled out his sandwich, and ate while watching the flow of the water. The sound of the stream was gentle and refreshing. Being here felt peaceful in a way he couldn't quite explain. He didn't hear any voices, or footsteps, or warnings. Just nature quiet, patient, welcoming him in its own slow way. After lunch, he decided to explore a little further from the stream, carefully marking trees and rocks so he wouldn't lose his way. The land changed quickly. One moment the ground was soft and damp, and just a few steps later it became dry and firm. He found clusters of beautiful wildflowers he had never seen before. They grew in small patches, as if protecting themselves from the rest of the wildness around them. He knelt down, touched the petals gently, and smiled. These small details reminded him that the land wasn't impossible, it just needed respect. He continued walking until he reached a small incline. Climbing it slowly, he reached the top and found a natural lookout point. From there, the land stretched far in every direction. A mix of rolling hills, dense brush, tall grass, and quiet shadows. It was beautiful, but its size was once again overwhelming. Caleb stood there, breathing deeply, feeling both small and strangely proud. He had walked deeper into the land than many dared to. He had seen parts of it that most people didn't bother exploring. After a few minutes, he headed back toward the area he had cleared, marking each turn carefully to avoid getting lost. The land tested him with every step: unexpected dips, hidden roots, clusters of sharp branches, but he took his time. Each challenge felt like part of the learning process. When he returned to the stream, he felt a warmth in his chest. The space he cleared wasn't big, but it was enough to show effort, enough to show a beginning. He sat down again and opened his notebook. He drew new lines on the map, added notes about the wildflowers, wrote down observations about the soil and the path he took. His handwriting wasn't perfect, but it didn't matter. This notebook was becoming a kind of conversation between him and the land. The afternoon sun began to lower, and he knew it was time to head back to the ranch. He gathered his tools, took one last look at the stream, and promised himself he'd return tomorrow. When he reached Daisy, she rubbed her head gently against his shoulder, as if sensing his tiredness. Caleb laughed softly and patted her neck. As he rode home, the sky turned golden. Shadows stretched long across the fields, and clouds glowed with soft colors. Caleb felt tired but satisfied. For the first time since arriving in town, he felt like he was doing more than just fixing things. He was building something new. But later that night, sitting at his small kitchen table with the map spread out before him, the old familiar feeling returned. the land was huge. Even the small part he studied was complicated and unpredictable. His progress seemed almost too tiny, almost too slow. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "This is too big for me," he whispered again, a gentle sigh escaping him. But unlike the first time he had said those words, he no longer felt discouraged. Instead, he felt thoughtful. The land was big, bigger than any challenge he had taken on before, but that didn't make it impossible. It only made it slow. It only meant he had to be patient. He closed the notebook, looked out the window at the dark night sky, and smiled to himself. Even though the land was too big for him now, he was beginning to understand it, and understanding, he realized, was its own form of progress. The land didn't need to be conquered. It needed to be learned, piece by piece, day by day. Caleb wasn't sure how far he would go or how long it would take, but he knew one thing clearly. He would try again tomorrow, and tomorrow felt full of possibilities. Caleb woke the next day with a calm feeling, as if the land itself had settled in his mind overnight. For weeks he had walked into the giant virgin with quiet steps and careful plans. He had marked paths, cleared brush, and learned the hidden patterns of the land. Every small discovery felt like a piece of a puzzle coming together. And even though he had whispered many times that the land was too big for him, he also knew he had grown stronger, more patient, and more connected with the world around him. Still, there was one thing he hadn't done yet. He had not taken a step back to see everything as a whole. He had looked at parts, but never the full picture. Today felt like the day to do that. He wanted to understand not just one corner of the land, not just one stream or one patch of soil, but what all of it meant together, how it shaped his life, and what it taught him. He prepared slowly, taking care to pack his tools, notebook, and enough water. Daisy watched him with calm eyes, as if she understood that today was important. When he finished packing, he placed his hand gently on her neck. "One more long day," he whispered to her, and Daisy flicked her ears as if agreeing. The ride to the giant virgin felt almost familiar now. The land no longer seemed like an unknown creature waiting to test him. Instead, it felt like an old friend, still difficult at times, still wild, but no longer frightening. When he reached the boundary, he tied Daisy in her usual spot and walked inside. The first place he visited was the small area he had cleared near the stream. It had changed more than he expected. The grass he had cut down had not grown back fully yet. The stones he had moved sat neatly near the tree line. The path he had carved with the saw was still visible, even though a few branches had fallen during windier days. He knelt by the stream again, dipping his hands into the cool water. It felt comforting, as if greeting him back. He took out his notebook and added a few observations. But soon he closed it, realizing that for once, he didn't want to record anything. He just wanted to look, to listen, to feel the land the way it was. After a few minutes, he stood up and followed one of the paths he had marked during previous visits. It led him along gentle slopes, through clusters of bushes, and around stones that glowed warm in the sun. Birds hopped from branch to branch above him. A small lizard scurried across the ground. Nature seemed at ease with him now, as if he had earned its quiet acceptance. When he reached the small rise that acted as a lookout point, he paused. The view stretched farther than he remembered. The land rolled like waves, rising, falling, curving gently in some places and sharply in others. Sunlight painted golden patches across the fields, while shadows rested in valleys like dark pools. It was peaceful, wild, and breathtaking all at once. Caleb stood there for a long time. He felt something warm settle in his chest, a mixture of pride, calm, and gratitude. He had come here months ago, thinking the land was impossible. He had been told countless times, "Try it if you can," with the expectation that he would fail like everyone else. And maybe he had not succeeded in the way others imagined. Maybe he never would fully tame this place. It was far too big, too wild, too unpredictable. But he had succeeded in something else. He had learned it, understood it, walked it with patience, And in return, the land had shown him beauty that few people took the time to see. He slowly walked back down the incline and wandered deeper into a part of the land he had not explored before. As he walked, he noticed how the ground changed from soft to firm, how the air cooled under the shade of taller trees, and how the sounds shifted from rustling grass to quiet leaves. Each step taught him something. Each turn revealed something new. He found a small open area where sunlight poured through the branches like a golden curtain. Bright wildflowers grew in a circle, as if arranged by nature for anyone who cared to stop and look. Caleb sat on a flat stone and breathed deeply. The land didn't feel enormous here. It felt gentle. He closed his eyes for a moment and listened. The wind whispered softly. A bird called from far away. The stream, though distant, hummed faintly like a calming song. He realized then that the land wasn't testing him. It had never been a challenge meant to defeat him. It was simply being itself, wide, complex, alive. People who tried to force it had failed. But he had come with patience, not pressure. He had come to learn, not to conquer. Hours passed without him noticing. He traveled from one familiar point to another. The stream, the marked trees, the rocky slope, the open meadow. With every step, he felt a quiet understanding grow inside him. He now knew which areas were soft after rain, which parts held water longer, where the ground stayed dry, where animals liked to rest, and which paths were safest. He had not mastered the land, but he had built a relationship with it. As the sun began to set, coloring the sky with soft pinks and purples, Caleb headed back toward Daisy. His legs were tired and his shoulders ached, but his heart felt lighter than ever. When he reached his horse, she nudged him gently, as if sensing his peaceful mood. He rode home through golden evening light. The ranch looked small and humble in the distance, but warm and welcoming. When he reached the barn, he cared for Daisy with slow, careful movements. Then he walked to his porch and sat down, looking toward the north where the giant Virgin lay. From here, it looked like one huge, dark shape resting quietly under the fading sky. Caleb smiled. It was still big, still wild, still far beyond anything he could ever fully control. And yet, he no longer felt intimidated. He no longer felt small. He felt connected. A few days later, he went into town to buy supplies. At the diner, some of the ranchers looked up when he walked in. They were still curious, still skeptical. "Been up to that land again?" one of them asked with a teasing tone. Caleb smiled softly. "Yes." "And?" another rancher said, raising a brow. "Still think you can handle it?" Caleb took a slow breath and replied calmly, "I don't think anyone can handle all of it. It's too big for that. But I can work with a part of it. That's enough for me." The men exchanged surprised looks. They had expected pride or defeat, but Caleb offered neither. He had found peace in the middle. Old man Harris, sitting at the far table, lifted his cup with a knowing smile. "Sometimes," he said, "you don't have to take all of something to understand it. Sometimes one piece is enough." Caleb nodded in agreement. When he returned home, he walked to the porch again and looked out across the land. A gentle wind blew across the grass, carrying the scent of earth and possibility. He knew he would keep exploring the giant Virgin. Little by little, never rushing, never trying to own it fully. He would simply learn it, appreciate it, and use the parts that welcomed him. The land wasn't conquered. It didn't need to be. It was respected. And in that quiet, simple truth, Caleb found everything he had been searching for: purpose, peace, and a connection deeper than any victory. Tomorrow, he thought, he would return again, and the land would greet him like it always had, wild, patient, and full of secrets, waiting for the one person who wasn't afraid to learn them slowly. He smiled gently into the fading light, grateful for the journey. And the journey, he knew, would never really end.